December 10, 1944, in the village of Lanzerath, Belgium. The frozen ground crunched under combat boots as First Lieutenant Lyle Book looked over the ridgeline that would be his platoon's final defensive spot. At 20 years old, he was one of the youngest officers in the United States Army. Still, the responsibility of his command felt heavy as he studied the snowy fields reaching toward the German border. Before we continue, show your support by subscribing and letting me know where you're watching from. The Intelligence and Scouting Platoon of the 394th Infantry Regiment had just been given orders that would put 18 men between the force of Nazi Germany's last desperate effort and the path to Allied victory. None of them could have known that in 6 days, their actions would hold back an entire SS Panzer Division for almost a whole day, completely changing the schedule of Hitler's Ardennes offensive and helping lead to the final defeat of the Battle of the Bulge. The Germans were on their way. The only thing they didn't know was when. Book had been born in a very different time. Growing up in St. Louis during the Great Depression, his family moved a lot, often staying in homes with only one bedroom, no indoor toilets, and no electricity. At 14 years old, wanting to help his family, he walked into a National Guard recruiting office and joined the headquarters company of the Missouri 138th Infantry Regiment. No one asked him how old he was. For $1 per drill day, young Lyle Book became a soldier. By 16, he had been promoted to supply sergeant, earning more money than most of his friends and sending it home to help feed his 4 brothers and sisters. The tough times of his childhood had built something unbreakable in him, a strength that would be very important on a frozen ridge in Belgium 4 years later. When the 35th Infantry Division was called to active duty on December 23, 1940, Book ended up taking part in the famous Louisiana maneuvers of 1941, where he did exceptionally well as a transportation sergeant for the regimental headquarters company. His good work was noticed by his superiors. After Pearl Harbor changed everything, Book signed up for Officer Candidate School, being chosen first out of several options. At Fort Benning, Georgia, he went through 4 months of hard training that would change him from a skilled enlisted man into a combat leader. On August 25, 1942, he finished 4th in his class of 57 officers. This accomplishment got him a job as an instructor, teaching small unit defensive strategies to the new group of officers. He stayed a full year at Fort Benning before being sent to the 99th Infantry Division to be deployed to Europe. The things he taught about defensive positions would soon be put to the test in situations much harder than any training exercise. The 99th Infantry Division got to Le Havre, France, in early November 1944. They were new soldiers, not yet tested in battle, showing up in what looked like a calm part of the front. The Allied push across Europe had been non-stop since D-Day. Paris was taken in August, Brussels in September, and Antwerp soon after. The forward movement seemed like it couldn't be stopped. The Ardennes area of Belgium, with its thick forests and rough land, was seen as a rest spot, a place to get new divisions ready before sending them into big operations. By the middle of November, the 99th had taken over for the experienced 60th Regiment of the 9th Infantry Division in the Ardennes. The area was strangely quiet, too quiet. Book was put in charge of the Intelligence and Scouting Platoon for the 394th Infantry Regiment. This was a special unit in the regiment, made up of soldiers picked because they were excellent shots and in top physical shape. Some had been college students before the war, part of the Army Specialized Training Program, before it was suddenly stopped to get more infantry soldiers. The platoon was usually made up of 25 men, split into 2 9-man scouting squads and a 7-man headquarters group. Their job was clear but risky. They were to go on scouting patrols up to and past German lines, capture enemy soldiers for information, pinpoint enemy locations, and be the eyes and ears of the regimental commander. They were not trained for long fights. They were scouts, like spies in uniforms, meant to find information and then disappear. For the next few weeks, the platoon set up observation posts and went on risky patrols behind enemy lines. They moved quietly through snowy, fog-covered ground, sometimes going as far as Losheim, 2 miles behind German spots. On these trips, they caught German soldiers and brought them back to be questioned. The work was scary but very important. Book and some of his men were among the first in the regiment to get the Combat Infantryman Badge, given for outstanding behavior in ground combat. Even with the dangers, they had few losses. The German soldiers across from them seemed happy to just stay in their positions along the Siegfried Line without any real action. Intelligence reports said the Germans were worn out, their fighting ability used up after years of war on many fronts. On December 10th, everything was different. Major Robert Kriz, the commanding officer of the 394th Infantry Regiment, called Book to regimental headquarters with new instructions. The platoon was to go right away to positions near the village of Lanzerath, about 6 miles southeast of where they were in Hunningen. Lanzerath was a very small town with just 23 houses and a church, located at an important road intersection in the northern area of the Losheim Gap. This 5-mile gap between the 99th Infantry Division to the north and the 106th Infantry Division to the south was a major weak point in the American defensive line. Intelligence had seen more German activity in the area. The platoon was sent to fill the gap and give a heads-up about any enemy movement. Behind them were roads that could let German forces get to the American rear quickly, possibly allowing them to surround the thinly spread divisions protecting this area. As Book looked at his maps, the size of the task became obvious. His platoon, supposed to have 25 men, but now with only 18 because some were assigned to other operations, was being told to defend a 5-mile gap in the front line. The only backup was the 3rd Battalion of the 394th Regiment, located at Buchholz Station, several miles back. If the Germans came through Lanzerath with a large force, his 18 men would be on their own. The tactical situation was even more complicated than it seemed. The intelligence and scouting platoon would be joined with Task Force X, a small unit from the 820th Tank Destroyer Battalion made up of 55 men with 4-towed 3-inch guns. Also, 22 men from the 820th 2nd Reconnaissance Platoon on an armored half-track, and 2 jeeps would be located in the village itself. It looked like a decent defensive force on paper, but in truth, the units had never practiced together and had no single command. The platoon got to Lanzerath on December 10th and right away started to strengthen their position. Book chose a ridgeline northwest of the village, a wooded high point that looked over a gentle slope leading down to the road from Lanzerath to the east. The spot gave them great lines of fire across open land. The men dug foxholes along the edge of the woods, spreading them out to provide covering fire for each other. Each spot was carefully hidden with camouflage and overhead protection against artillery. The snow that had fallen recently gave them more cover, making their positions almost impossible to see from the open field below. They set up their weapons with great care. 2 .30-caliber machine guns covered the main ways in. Book had personally gotten a Jeep-mounted 50-caliber heavy machine gun, a powerful weapon that could rip through enemy groups at a long distance. This heavy gun was placed in a protected spot, able to stop reinforcements coming from the south while being safe from direct attack. The platoon aimed all their weapons at a farm fence that cut across the field about 100 yards from their position, making a pre-planned kill zone. The men put up trip wires tied to empty cans with rocks inside to hear anyone trying to sneak through the woods at night. They set up communication with battalion headquarters at Losheim Graben with a telephone landline and kept radio contact with regimental headquarters at Hunningen. Patrols were sent into Lanzerath to work with Task Force X and the scouting platoon there. The men of the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon got into their frozen foxholes and waited. The temperature fell far below freezing. A cold wind blew across the ridge with periods of snow. 4 to 5 inches of snow covered their position, hiding their foxholes even more. The cold was harsh, but the men handled it. They were young, mostly in their late teens or early 20s, a long way from home, protecting a ridge in Belgium that most of them couldn't have pointed to on a map before the war. For 5 days, they watched and waited. German activity on the other side of the border grew quite a bit. On the night of December 15th, Book and his men heard the sound of vehicles moving in the dark to the east. Something was happening. Reports came from other units about strange enemy movements. The Germans were bringing in more troops, gathering forces along the Siegfried Line. American commanders saw the activity, but thought it was for defense, believing the Germans were getting ready for an American attack toward the Roer River dams further north. The idea of a big German offensive seemed unlikely. The German army was beaten, its power gone, its supplies used up, or that's what American intelligence thought. At 5:30 on the morning of December 16, 1944, the world blew up. A huge artillery attack started along an 80-mile front as 1,600 German artillery guns began firing all at once. The shelling was the start of Operation Wacht am Rhein, Hitler's last big gamble in the West. The goal was huge in its ambition: break through the American lines in the Ardennes, push to the Meuse River, take the key port of Antwerp, divide the Allied armies, and force a peace deal that would let Germany focus all its last strength on the Soviet Union. For this offensive, Hitler had gathered his final reserves, 3 whole armies with elite SS panzer divisions that had been re-equipped and strengthened, would charge through what Hitler thought was a weak part of the American line held by new troops. The artillery attack went on for 90 minutes. Shells landed all over the front, hitting command posts, communication lines, and forward positions. The men of Book's platoon stayed low in their foxholes as the forest around them exploded. Tree limbs broke and fell. The force of nearby blasts hit their bodies. The frozen ground shook with every explosion. But amazingly, the shelling wasn't very effective against their well-made positions on the ridge. The Germans were firing without seeing, not able to find the exact spot of the American foxholes. When the shelling stopped at 7 Hao, the men came out of their holes, shaken but okay. The telephone line to battalion headquarters was cut, but their radio still worked. As the sun came up over the snowy land, the platoon watched with concern as Task Force X left Lanzerath. The tank destroyers and scouting unit, which were their main support, pulled back without a word and without telling Book. His platoon was now totally alone, the only American unit between the German border and the back areas of the 99th Infantry Division. Through the early morning fog, Book saw movement to the east. Soldiers were getting into formation, hundreds of them, way more than his intelligence reports had said were there. He radioed regimental headquarters and asked for permission to pull back, to do a fighting retreat and slow down the enemy while keeping his men safe. The answer came back right away and was very clear. Stay in position. Reinforcements from the 3rd Battalion will come to support you. Hold at all costs. At about 8 Haas, 3 men from the platoon, Sergeant William Slate, Private James Sly, and Technician 5th Grade Sam Jenkins, went down to set up an observation post in a house on the eastern side of Lanzerath that Task Force X had left behind. Book went with them to get a final look at the situation. What he saw in the early morning light sent a chill down his spine. A line of about 500 German soldiers was walking toward Lanzerath from the direction of Losheim. Their unique helmet shape showed they were Fallschirmjäger, German paratroopers, some of the best troops Germany still had. These were not the tired, downhearted soldiers that American intelligence had talked about. These were experienced combat soldiers moving with order and purpose, coming to take advantage of what they thought would be a clear breakthrough of American lines. Book and the observation team rushed back to the ridge and warned the platoon. 500 German paratroopers against 18 American soldiers. The odds were about 28 to 1. Everything in Book's training told him to fall back, to not get into a major fight against such a huge force, but his orders were clear. Hold at all costs. The German column got to Lanzerath and started to move through the village. An old Belgian woman, scared by the German troops, went up to a group of German officers standing near a cafe. She talked to them, pointing toward the ridge where the American positions were hidden. We don't know if she did it on purpose to give away the American location or was just trying to keep her village from being destroyed. What is known is that the information got to the German commander, who right away started to get his battalion ready for an attack on the American position. At around 10 Freund, the first group of German paratroopers came out of Lanzerath and started moving up the snowy slope toward the American foxholes. They moved in a perfect infantry attack formation, spread out in long lines with their weapons ready. The morning sun shined off the new snow, making the battlefield very bright. The Germans could see the woods clearly, but they had no idea where the American positions were exactly. They moved forward with confidence, not expecting much of a fight, if any. Book watched them come, waiting for the right moment. His men lay quietly in their hidden foxholes, their weapons aimed at the fence line they had targeted days before. The Germans climbed over the fence, still moving forward. 100 yards, 90 yards, 80 yards. At about 75 yards, Book gave the order that would start one of the most incredible defensive fights in American military history. The American position exploded with gunfire. Two .30 caliber machine guns opened up at the same time, their crossing fields of fire making a wall of lead across the snowy slope. M1 rifles fired with deadly accuracy as the expert marksmen of the platoon shot at individual soldiers. The result was devastating. German paratroopers fell in large numbers, cut down by the precise controlled fire. The fence line that the Germans had just crossed turned into a killing field. Men tried to hide behind it, but the wooden fence offered no safety from rifle bullets. The .50 caliber machine gun joined in, its heavy rounds able to go through multiple targets. The unique sound of the big weapon echoed across the valley like a giant ripping canvas. The first German attack lasted only a few minutes before the survivors ran back toward Lanzerath, leaving dozens of dead and wounded scattered on the snow. The Americans had no casualties. The surprise of the ambush had been total. The German battalion commander, looking at his losses and the strength of the position that had just stopped his attack, made the logical but wrong guess that he was up against a much larger American force, maybe a full company with heavy weapons. He chose to try again, this time with more fire support. Artillery and mortar fire started to land on the American position as the Germans got ready for a second attack. Around noon, the second wave came. More German paratroopers came out of Lanzerath, this time moving with more care, using any cover they could find, and firing to keep the Americans down as they moved forward. The American position again erupted with defensive fire. The machine guns swept across the attacking groups. The riflemen chose individual targets with the skill that got them picked for the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon. The .50 caliber machine gun fired away at groups of Germans trying to gather for a charge on the American positions. Again, the attack was stopped by the controlled fire of the defenders. German losses grew. The snow across the field was now red with blood. Bodies lay where they had fallen, a sign of the accuracy of American shooting. The Germans pulled back again, but this time they kept up the pressure with constant fire. Machine guns in Lanzerath sprayed the American woodline. Mortars kept falling, trying to destroy or suppress the defenders. The situation was getting serious. They were using ammunition very quickly. Several men had been hurt by shell pieces. The Germans were figuring out the position's layout with every attack. It was just a matter of time before they found the sides and surrounded the position. Book radioed regimental headquarters again, telling them the situation, and once more asking for permission to pull back before being encircled. Again the order came back, "Hold your position. Reinforcements are coming." Around 2 was in the afternoon, the Germans started their third major attack. This time, they sent in more forces, attacking with even more resolve. The American defenders poured fire into the advancing Germans, but the large number of attackers was starting to make a difference. Private Billy Queen, one of the 4 forward artillery observers who had joined the platoon, was at a position when a German bullet hit him in the stomach. He cried out and fell. Without a medic or medical tools, there was nothing his friends could do but make him comfortable. Queen died in a few minutes, the only American death in the day-long fight. Sergeant William Slate took control of the .50 caliber machine gun as the third attack was at its strongest. He fired shot after shot into the German groups, the heavy weapon jumping against its stand. He fired so much that the barrel started to glow red-hot. The gun began firing on its own as the heat set off rounds in the chamber. Then, disastrously, the barrel bent from the intense heat and the weapon jammed. The platoon's strongest weapon was now useless at the most critical time of the battle. Even with this loss, the third German attack also failed against the American position. The paratroopers fell back again, having taken even more casualties. The field in front of the American foxholes was covered with German dead and wounded. The German battalion commander was now in a bad spot. His unit had at least 92 confirmed losses, which greatly reduced his fighting strength. He was supposed to have cleared this path hours ago, letting other forces move through the opening. Instead, he was stuck fighting what he still thought was a large American force. He decided to stop more direct attacks and instead check the sides of the American position while keeping up the pressure with gunfire. As evening came, the situation for the Americans became impossible. They had been fighting for nearly 10 hours without any help. Ammunition was very low. Most of the men were wounded in some way. Communication with higher headquarters was gone. The .50 caliber was broken. The Germans were finally moving to attack the sides of the position instead of continuing pointless frontal attacks. As it got dark, German paratroopers finally managed to get around the American flanks. Groups of about 50 German soldiers broke through the perimeter from several directions. The Americans fought hand-to-hand in some foxholes, but the end was certain. The Germans moved systematically from one spot to another, taking over each foxhole one by one. A German soldier fired into Book's position, hitting the lieutenant in the leg and badly wounding the man in his foxhole. Book was captured at gunpoint. In minutes, the whole platoon had been defeated. 15 men were taken prisoner right there. 2 others, Privates Jenkins and Preston, had been sent earlier in the day to regimental headquarters to get reinforcements. They would be captured the next day. 3 men, Robinson, McGee, and Slay, had been cut off earlier and got away toward Los Heimgraben, finally getting back to American lines. The Battle of Lanzerath Ridge was finished. The 18 men of the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon, helped by 4 forward artillery, observers had held off a whole German battalion of about 500 paratroopers for nearly a full day. They had caused 92 confirmed casualties while losing only 1 killed and 14 wounded before finally being beaten. More importantly, they had done something much bigger than just casualties. They had delayed the whole German offensive in the northern area for almost 20 hours. As the captured Americans were gathered in Lanzerath and treated for their wounds by German medics who had set up aid stations in village homes, the full meaning of the day's fight started to become clear. The German 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, beaten up and tired from their fights against the small American force, did not try to keep advancing that night. They had suffered heavy losses, and their commander was afraid that the woods past Lanzerath were full of more American troops and maybe tanks. The careful choice to stop and regroup instead of pushing forward in the dark would have major effects on the entire German offensive. Around midnight, nearly 12 hours late, a column of German tanks finally got to Lanzerath. This was Kampfgruppe Peiper, the strongest armored group in the entire German offensive. Led by SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper, this battle group was made up of about 4,800 men and 800 vehicles, including 117 tanks, among them the dreaded Tiger and King Tiger heavy tanks. Peiper's mission was vital to the success of the whole operation. He was supposed to drive to the Meuse River, take the bridges, and hold them for the forces coming after him. Speed was the most important thing. The plan said he should reach the Meuse on the first day. Instead, he found himself stuck behind a discouraged parachute regiment that had spent the whole day fighting a platoon-sized force. Peiper was very angry. He confronted Oberstleutnant Helmut von Hoffmann, commander of the 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, in a loud argument that American prisoners saw. Peiper asked why the regiment had stopped, why they hadn't cleared the path forward, why they hadn't checked the woods beyond Lanzerath to see if more American forces were there. Hoffmann, who was outranked by the SS officer, even though his formal rank was higher, tried to say that his regiment had taken heavy losses, that the Americans had been stronger than they thought, and that his men needed to rest. Peiper was not impressed. He personally led a scouting party forward with his own troops and found that the woods were empty. The American force that had held up the German schedule for a whole day had been just 18 men. By the time this was discovered and Kampfgruppe Peiper started its advance again, it was 4:30 in the morning of December 17th, more than 18 hours late. This delay would be a disaster for the German plans. The strict schedule of the offensive needed everything to be perfectly timed. Delayed units caused traffic jams on the narrow roads. Forces that were supposed to follow piled up behind the bottleneck at Lanzerath. American commanders, at first caught off guard by the offensive, used the valuable hours bought by units like Buch's platoon to send reinforcements to the areas under threat. The 1st Infantry Division, the 2nd Infantry Division, parts of the 7th Armored Division, and eventually the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions all moved to block the way. By the time Kampfgruppe Peiper finally broke free and moved toward the Meuse, they found their path was being fought for more and more. Peiper's battle group did have amazing success in the first days of the offensive. They overran American positions at Honsfeld and Billingen, taking important fuel supplies. On December 17th, near the Baugnier crossroads, parts of Peiper's command committed one of the war's worst atrocities, killing about 84 American prisoners of war in what became known as the Malmedy Massacre. The battle group kept going toward Stavelot, crossing the Amblève River on December 18th, pushing deeper into American-held land. For a short time, it seemed Peiper might actually reach his goal, but the 18-hour delay at Lanzerath had given American forces time to respond. Parts of the 30th Infantry Division, the 82nd Airborne Division, and the 3rd Armored Division all moved toward Peiper's route. Blown bridges made them take detours. American tank destroyers ambushed German columns. Fighter bombers, kept on the ground by bad weather on December 16th, went back into the sky and pounded the exposed German tanks. By December 22nd, Kampfgruppe Peiper was surrounded in the small town of La Glaise, cut off from supplies, almost out of fuel and ammunition. The once powerful battle group that had started the offensive with 4,800 men and 117 tanks was now down to about 800 men with no working tanks. On the night of December 23rd, Peiper told his remaining men to leave all vehicles and equipment and escape on foot back to German lines. They left behind more than 100 vehicles, including 6 King Tiger tanks in La Glaise. The spearhead of the German 6th Panzer Army had been stopped. The breakthrough that was supposed to get to Antwerp had made it less than halfway to the Meuse River. The carefully planned schedule, messed up on the very first day by 18 American soldiers on a frozen ridge, never got back on track. Meanwhile, the captured members of the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon started their own difficult journey. The men who could walk were marched east toward Germany. Those too badly hurt to move were left in German field hospitals. After 2 days of walking in the freezing cold, the prisoners were put into a railroad boxcar at the village of Junkerath. Book found himself packed into a single cattle car with 71 other American POWs. They traveled for days with no food or water. By Christmas Day, 7 men in Book's car had died, and the others were barely alive. Finally, the prisoners were taken to hospitals in Frankfurt and Hanover to treat their wounds. From there, they were sent to POW camps where they would stay for the next 5 months until they were freed by Allied forces in April 1945. Lieutenant Book saw the result of December 16th as a total failure. His unit had been defeated. Most of his men were wounded. All had been captured. The mission to hold the position had ended with the position being lost. He had no idea that his platoon had done something far more important than just holding a piece of ground. Because of lost communication and the mess of the offensive's first days, American commanders had no idea right away what the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon had done. The unit's actions were lost in the confusion of the larger battle. When the war was over and the prisoners were finally set free, most of the platoon's members just wanted to go home. They were tired, hurt, and traumatized by months in disease-filled POW camps. The last thing they wanted was notice or praise. It was only slowly, in the years after the war, that the full importance of the Battle of Lanzerath Ridge started to be known. Historians looking at German after-action reports found that the 18-hour delay caused by the resistance at Lanzerath had seriously messed up the schedule of the 6th Panzer Army. The job of beating the 99th Infantry Division had been given to the 12th SS Panzer Division, with extra units to help. Despite more than 10 days of hard fighting, the 12th SS Panzer Division was never able to push American forces off Elsenborn Ridge, where parts of the 99th and 2nd Infantry Divisions had set up a defensive line. The northern part of the Battle of the Bulge became a problem spot for the whole German offensive. If the initial breakthrough had happened on time, German forces might have taken over the huge American supply dumps around Liège and Spa, which would have completely changed the way the battle went. The men of the platoon slowly learned what they had done. In June 1966, to Book's surprise, a Silver Star Medal showed up in his mailbox with no ceremony or reason. No other members of the platoon got any recognition, which upset Book a lot. Soon after, he was interviewed by John S. D. Eisenhower for the book The Bitter Woods, which told about the platoon's actions in detail. Eisenhower, who later became the ambassador to Belgium, had Book and other platoon members as guests when they visited Lanzerath in December 1969. The village had been rebuilt after the war, and the Belgians welcomed the American veterans who had fought to defend their country. One platoon member whose injuries especially bothered him was William James, whose real name was TKN. He went through 37 surgeries trying to fix the damage from his combat wounds before dying from complications on June 22, 1977. Columnist Jack Anderson heard about James's story and started a campaign to get him awarded the Medal of Honor after his death. The campaign brought national attention to the platoon's actions for the first time. Congressional hearings were held to look into whether the platoon should get more recognition. The hearings led to a recommendation that James get the Medal of Honor. And amazingly, Congress passed Public Law 96-145, signed by President Jimmy Carter on December 14, 1979, which specifically got rid of the normal time limits just for members of the 394th Infantry Regiment's Intelligence and Reconnaissance Platoon. The Army and Air Force agreed with the Medal of Honor recommendation, but the Marine Corps, which had to approve all such awards, said that James had not shown enough bravery to deserve the nation's highest award. The decision was controversial and still is today. Still, the attention from Congress led to a full review of the platoon's actions. On October 26, 1981, 36 years after the battle, the members of the platoon finally got formal recognition for their bravery. 14 of the original 18 were at a ceremony at Fort Myer, Virginia, hosted by Secretary of the Army John O. Marsh, Jr. The awards were amazing. 4 members, including Lieutenant Book, got the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest award for bravery. 5 members got the Silver Star. 9 members got the Bronze Star with V device for valor. The whole platoon was given the Presidential Unit Citation, recognizing all of them as a unit. These awards made the Intelligence and Reconnaissance Platoon of the 394th Infantry Regiment the most decorated American platoon of its size for a single event in World War II. The ceremony in 1981 finally gave the men the praise they had deserved decades before. Book, who was then a successful chiropractor, spoke with great emotion about his men and what they gave up. He always said that the real heroes were the ones who had fought with him, especially those like Billy Queen, who had lost their lives, and William James, whose wounds had eventually killed him years after the fight. The recognition meant a lot to the veterans. For almost 4 decades, they had believed that they had failed, that their capture was a loss. Now, at last, they knew that their brave stand on a frozen ridge had played a real part in the Allied victory in one of the war's most important battles. The Belgian government put up an official monument at the Lanzerath Ridge site on May 12, 2005. The memorial, a simple but respectful stone marker, honors everyone who fought there on December 16, 1944. The writing on it says that 18 American soldiers held this spot against 500 German paratroopers, slowing down the advance of an entire SS Panzer Division and helping the Allied victory in the Battle of the Bulge. The monument has become a special place for military historians and veterans' families to visit. Every year on December 16th, a small ceremony is held to remember the battle. Belgian school children learn about what took place on the ridge above their village. The story of the Intelligence and Reconnaissance Platoon has become a part of the local history. Lyle Book lived to see all of this recognition. He got married, had a family, and built a good career as a chiropractor, working from 1949 until he retired in 1997. He didn't talk much about the war until he was older, when he finally started telling his stories to historians and researchers. He stayed in touch with the living members of his platoon, going to reunions and memorial services. When other platoon members passed away, Book would often give the eulogies, talking about their courage and sacrifice. He worked tirelessly for recognition, not for himself, but for his men. The awards that finally came in 1981 were because of years of letter-writing campaigns, congressional testimony, and constant effort by Book for his soldiers. On December 2, 2016, First Lieutenant Lyle Book died of pneumonia at the age of 92, just a few days before his 93rd birthday. He was the last living officer of the platoon. His death was mentioned in military magazines and newspapers all over the country. The New York Times printed a large obituary acknowledging his part in one of World War II's most amazing defensive fights. Veterans groups honored his memory. The living members of the 99th Infantry Division held memorial services. He was buried with full military honors. In his eulogy, speakers said that Book had spent his final decades making sure that his men got the recognition they deserved, never wanting attention for himself, always giving credit to those who had served under him. The Battle of Lanzerath Ridge is known as one of the most incredible small unit actions in American military history. 18 soldiers, led by a 20-year-old lieutenant, held off 500 enemy soldiers for nearly a whole day, causing 92 confirmed casualties while losing only 1 killed and 14 wounded before finally being defeated. More importantly, they slowed down the advance of the whole German 6th Panzer Army for 18 vital hours at the start of Germany's last big offensive in the West. The delay let American forces react to the surprise attack, rush reinforcements to threatened areas, and set up defensive lines that would, in the end, stop and defeat the German breakthrough. The math of the battle is simple. The German offensive needed to follow a strict schedule exactly. Kampfgruppe Peiper, the lead unit of the attack, was supposed to get to the Meuse River on December 16th. Instead, they were held up behind a parachute regiment that had spent a whole day fighting what they thought was a big American force but was really just 18 men. When Peiper finally got going on the morning of December 17th, he was 18 hours behind schedule. He never caught up. American reinforcements got to blocking positions before he could break through. The fuel he needed was destroyed or taken by American forces who had time to react because of the delay. The bridges he needed to cross were blown up by American engineers who had time to get ready because of the delay. The air support that would eventually destroy his battle group was able to take off and find targets because of the delay. Every hour that Book's platoon held, that ridge gave American commanders time to deal with the crisis. The 1st Infantry Division had time to get into position. The 2nd Infantry Division had time to set up defenses on Elsenborn Ridge. The 7th Armored Division had time to get to St. Vith. The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions had time to move to Werbemont and Bastogne. All of these movements, which were key to stopping the German breakthrough, were possible because of the time bought by small unit actions like the stand at Lanzerath. Military historians have figured out that if the German schedule had been followed, if Kampfgruppe Peiper had reached the Meuse on time, the result of the Battle of the Bulge might have been very different. The Allies would probably still have won, but it would have cost much more in lives and time. The story of the Intelligence and Reconnaissance Platoon is powerful because it shows basic military values. 18 young men, greatly outnumbered, facing huge odds, chose to stand and fight instead of retreating. They obeyed orders to hold their position even when those orders seemed impossible. They fought with skill and bravery through a day-long battle, causing a lot of casualties on a much larger enemy force. They kept their unit together and disciplined under great pressure. When they were finally beaten, they surrendered with honor, having done much more than anyone could have expected. Their story proves that in war, small units in the right spot at the right time can have strategic results far bigger than their size. The platoon's action also shows the importance of leadership at the small unit level. Lieutenant Book was 20 years old, one of the youngest officers in the Army, leading men who were in many cases older than he was. Yet his leadership during the battle was outstanding. He placed his unit smartly, using the land to his best advantage. He controlled their fire, waiting for the perfect moment to start the ambush. He directed their fire well during the fight, making sure that weapons supported each other. He communicated with higher headquarters, trying to give them correct information about the situation. When told to hold even with impossible odds, he gave that order to his men, and they obeyed. His own courage under fire, moving between positions during the fight, encouraged his soldiers. When he was finally wounded and captured, his first thought was for his men. The men of the platoon were just as amazing. They were expert shooters who had been chosen for the intelligence and reconnaissance role because of their excellent skills. During the battle, that skill showed. Every burst from their machine guns, every shot from their rifles was aimed and effective. They didn't fire wildly or waste ammo. They held their positions despite artillery fire, despite being wounded, despite watching Billy Queen die, despite knowing they were hugely outnumbered with no chance of help. The discipline and bravery they showed was incredible. These were not experienced combat veterans. The 99th Infantry Division was new, just arrived in Europe, not yet tested in battle. Yet, when the time came, these young men fought like seasoned professionals. The German forces that fought them were not weak. The 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment of the 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division were paratroopers, elite troops, Even by German standards, they had battle experience from past campaigns. They outnumbered the Americans about 28-1. They had artillery and mortar support. They should have taken over the American position in the first attack. The fact that they couldn't do so for nearly a whole day shows both the skill of the defenders and the benefits of well-prepared defensive positions held by disciplined soldiers. The Germans showed bravery by continuing to attack even with growing casualties. Their battalion commander showed tactical skill by eventually trying to get around the sides instead of continuing pointless frontal attacks. But by the time they managed to take the position, they had suffered casualties that basically destroyed their unit as an effective fighting force. The Battle of Lanzerath Ridge also showed the fog of war and how it affects military operations. American commanders had no idea what Book's platoon was doing because communications were cut. The platoon fought alone, not knowing that their resistance was having strategic effects. When they were finally defeated and captured, Lieutenant Book thought he had failed. The mission had been to hold the position, and the position had been lost. He carried that feeling of failure for decades. Likewise, German commanders were working with incomplete information. The battalion commander attacking the ridge thought he was facing a much larger force, probably a full company with heavy weapons. That belief led to careful tactics and the choice to stop the advance after dark. The German High Command had no real-time idea of why their schedule was falling apart on the first day. Only after the battle, when historians could look at records from both sides, did the full story come out. The treatment of the captured Americans by their German captors was generally proper. Following the Geneva Conventions, the Germans gave medical care to the wounded in aid stations set up in Lanzerath homes. They let the prisoners get treatment before being marched to the rear. This is a big contrast to the Malmedy massacre that happened the next day, when parts of Kampfgruppe Peiper murdered American prisoners. The difference shows that war crimes were not a universal German practice, but were often specific to a unit, showing the leadership and character of certain commanders. The paratroopers who captured Book's platoon were professional soldiers who followed the rules of war. Peiper's SS troops, on the other hand, committed one of the war's worst atrocities. The prisoner of war experience of the platoon members was terrible. Packed into cattle cars without food or water, watching fellow prisoners die from cold and dehydration, spending months in disease-filled camps with not enough food and medical care. The men suffered greatly. Several almost died from their wounds and the conditions of their captivity. When they were finally freed in April 1945, they were like skeletons, sick and traumatized. Many carried physical and psychological wounds from their time as prisoners for the rest of their lives. William James went through decades of surgeries trying to fix damage from his combat wounds before finally dying from complications. These men paid a very high price for their service. The late recognition of the platoon's actions points to a problem in the system of military awards and decorations. The chaos of combat, especially in a confusing situation like the first days of the Battle of the Bulge, meant that many acts of bravery went unnoticed. When units were overrun or captured, what they accomplished was often lost in the fog of war. The fact that it took 36 years for Book's platoon to get the right recognition is proof that the system was not good enough. Only through constant effort by Lieutenant Book, stories by journalists like Jack Anderson, congressional hearings, and finally special laws, did these men finally get the awards they had earned in 1944. How many other similar stories were never written down, never recognized, and lost to history? The Battle of Lanzerath Ridge has been the topic of many books, articles, and documentaries. Alex Kershaw's The Longest Winter gave the most complete story of the battle and brought it to a larger audience. The book became a New York Times bestseller, telling a new generation the story of 18 soldiers who changed history. Military historians still study the battle as an example of successful, small-unit defensive tactics. The platoon's action is now taught at military academies as a case study in leadership, tactics, and the importance of individual small-unit actions in affecting larger campaigns. The lessons of Lanzerath are still important for modern military forces. The importance of well-trained soldiers who can act on their own when communications are cut. The value of junior officers who can make tactical choices without constant direction from higher headquarters. The advantage of prepared defensive positions held by disciplined soldiers. The powerful effect of accurate shooting and smart use of the land. The courage needed to stand and fight when greatly outnumbered. These ideas are timeless. They were true in 1944 and are still true today. Modern military training focuses on decentralized decision-making, small-unit leadership, and giving power to junior leaders. The stand at Lanzerath shows why these ideas are important. The story also shows the human side of war. These were not superhuman fighters, but regular young men who found themselves in an amazing situation. Lyle Book had joined the Army at 14 to help his family during the Depression. Many of his men had been college students before the war. They came from all parts of American life, brought together by the draft and the country's needs. When the time came, they acted heroically, not because they were special, but because they were well-trained, well-led, and dedicated to their mission and to each other. The bonds made in combat are some of the strongest human connections. The men of the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon stayed close for the rest of their lives, going to reunions, writing letters, and supporting each other through the difficulties of life after the war. The Belgian people who lived through the battle and saw what the Americans did for their country never forgot. For decades after the war, local people stayed in touch with platoon members, sending letters, hosting visits, and making sure the sacrifice was remembered. When the monument was dedicated in 2005, 3 generations of Belgian families came to honor the men who had fought to protect their village. This bond between liberators and the liberated is one of the lasting legacies of World War II. The Americans who fought in Europe were not conquerors, but liberators, and the people they freed remembered and honored that sacrifice. The Battle of Lanzerath Ridge stands as proof of a basic truth about war. Victory in war is not decided just by the biggest battles or the most famous generals. It is also decided by the combined effect of thousands of small actions, many of them by unknown units whose names will never be widely known. 18 soldiers holding a ridge for a day, a squad holding a bridge for an hour, a platoon defending a crossroads for a night. Each of these small actions, added up across a whole theater of war, decides the outcome of campaigns. The men who fight these small battles often don't know the strategic importance of what they are doing. They just do their duty, follow their orders, and support their friends. In doing so, they change history. Lieutenant Book and his men did not try to become heroes. They were given an impossible mission, and they did their best to complete it. They held their position as long as was humanly possible. When they were finally defeated, they had achieved something incredible. 92 German casualties, 18 hours of delay forced on the enemy's schedule, one of the most decorated small unit actions in American military history. They showed that courage, skill, and leadership at the tactical level can have strategic results. They proved that ordinary Americans, when trained and led well, can do extraordinary things. They showed that even in defeat, even in capture, even in failure by normal military standards, a unit can win by the measure that truly matters, helping the overall mission succeed. As the years go by and the veterans of World War II leave us, it becomes more and more important to keep and share their stories. The Battle of Lanzerath Ridge is not just a story of military tactics and strategic results. It is a story of human bravery, of young men who stood firm when it would have been easier to run, who fought when it would have been safer to surrender, who faced suffering and captivity with dignity and honor. It is a story that needs to be told to each new generation so they understand the price of freedom, the cost of victory, and the debt we owe to those who came before. On December 16th each year, ceremonies are held at the monument on Lanzerath Ridge. Wreaths are laid, speeches are given, and the names of the platoon members are read out loud. Belgian school children learn about what happened on that frozen ridge decades ago. American veterans and military members visit to show respect. The tradition of remembrance goes on, making sure that the sacrifice is not forgotten, that the story lives on. As long as we remember what 18 American soldiers did on that December day in 1944, their legacy continues. They bought valuable time with their bravery. They delayed an enemy offensive with their skill. They upheld their nation's honor with their sacrifice. They represented the best traditions of American military service. The story of the Intelligence and Reconnaissance Platoon of the 394th Infantry Regiment reminds us that in the grand scope of history, individual actions are important. 18 men changed the direction of a battle. Their delay of the German advance helped lead to the final Allied victory in the Battle of the Bulge. That victory shortened the war, saved countless lives, and helped protect freedom in Western Europe. The line from their foxholes on a Belgian ridge to the world we live in today is direct and clear. We are the ones who benefit from their courage. We have freedom because they were willing to stand. We live in peace because they were willing to fight. We owe them a debt that can never be fully paid back, but we can honor it by remembering their story, by teaching it to our children, and by making sure that their names and their actions are never forgotten. First Lieutenant Leal Book and the men of the Intelligence and Reconnaissance Platoon did not fail on December 16, 1944. They succeeded beyond what anyone could imagine. They held a position they were ordered to hold for as long as any unit could have held it. They caused casualties far greater than their own numbers. They delayed a major enemy offensive at a crucial time. They showed that Americans, even when greatly outnumbered, even when cut off and alone, even when facing the best troops Germany had, would stand and fight with skill and courage. Their story deserves to be remembered, along with the more famous battles and heroes of World War II. They were ordinary men who did extraordinary things when their country needed them most. That is the definition of heroism. That is the legacy of Lanzerath.